Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. We have a special guest with us here today. It's Tor Mogensen, all the way from Denmark, product manager for Universal Audio.
Yeah.
It's great to have you here, my friend. Great to see you again.
Good to see you again, yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for traveling the long distance to come in.
It's always a pleasure to come here. And every time I come here, it's typically like once every half year, a year. The place just grows and grows.
It is amazing.
It becomes cooler every time.
Never stops.
Yeah.
Never stops. Speaking of never stopping, we've got the latest version of software for the aux to talk about today.
Yeah. So we basically just announced version 1.2 with some really cool new features that I hope that we can spend a little time kind of delving into today.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
But before we do that, for those who don't know, give us just a brief overview of what the aux is.
Yeah, so the aux is basically, I kind of view it as a guitar recording solution. That's probably the best way to kind of describe it. So it does quite a few things. So it's kind of a combination of two main things. One thing is that it's an attenuator, which basically allows you, if you have like an old tube amp, or a new one for that matter, and I guess any guitar player who has a tube amp has tried to play, and the engineer or their wife or the neighbors come and go like, oh, turn it down.
Right.
And the problem with all these amps is that tube amps generally sound best when you turn them up really loud. And once you turn them down, they sort of become a little anemic.
Right.
So aux basically allow you to insert a point between the amp and the speaker, allowing you to crank up the amp as hard as you want to, then go into the aux and let the aux basically soak out some of the power that's coming from the amp, and then put whatever actual volume you want into the speaker. So it allows you to run the amp as hot as you want to get the sound that you want, and then basically control on the aux how loud it is. Right.
And the key to that is that UA is using pretty specialized technology so that it feels right, as well as gets the volume turned down.
We could spend an hour or more talking about the finer details of how to do attenuation right. But as you say, the main thing is that it's actually kind of tricky to do attenuation in the proper way, where it doesn't sound like you're attenuating, because there are some relationships that happen between the amp and the speaker that basically, if you don't do it right, it's going to sound different. And aux basically perfectly simulates what, or not even simulates, but it basically reacts the same way as the speaker would, and the amp would react in the same way when you have the volume cranked really, really high.
Right.
So that's a bit of the trickery behind this thing. And it gets a little bit hot and stuff, because it's basically taking little power coming from the amp and just kind of turning it into heat.
Right.
So that's one part of it. And obviously that's super neat when you play live, or even if you want to play in your bedroom and stuff like that. Any place where you can play as loud as you want to, which is pretty much everywhere these days, especially if you have like an old 100-watt Marshall or something like that.
Right.
So that's one part of it, and that's really, really cool. The other part that, I haven't been with Universal Audio that long, and when I first got my aux, I was kind of, the attenuation part was something that totally made sense to me, because I have some old Marshalls and stuff, so I was like totally into that from the get-go. But the other part that's really cool is that it's also a recording solution. So typically, if you want to record guitar, obviously you need a guitar and an amp, and then you need a microphone and you need a room to do it. And on top of that, you also need some expertise in terms of how to actually put the mics in the proper place to make it sound good. And to be honest, I'm totally not that guy. First of all, I don't have a room for it.
Right.
I don't have microphones, and I don't have the expertise to actually record this properly. But aux takes care of all that stuff. So basically, inside aux, apart from the attenuation, is a simulated speakers, cabinets, microphones, and a room.
Right.
So all the things you basically need to get a great guitar recording without having to hear your amp at all. So right now what we're doing is you can actually turn the amp all the way off, so you're not listening to it. You will only be listening to it through studio monitors or headphones or whatever you want to do. So if you're in your bedroom or in your little project studio, you don't even have to bring a cabinet for your guitar head if that's what you use, or you can turn the speaker in your combo amp totally off, so you're not bothering anybody, and just practice or play through headphones. And aux includes a wealth of different cabinet and speaker combinations. Anything from 110s, 112s, 212s, 4x12s.
Right.
A wealth of different ones that obviously match different classic amps. So, you typically don't want to play like a little Princeton through a 4x12 or something like that.
But you could if you wanted to.
You could if you wanted to.
Right.
So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that we have quite a few different microphones that you can choose, and you can do two virtual close mics, and one room mic, all running at the same time to get the sound you want. And then obviously it sits in a room, a virtual room that really, not reverb, but literally a room with a microphone in it that picks up the ambience of the room. And it's one of the things that I really like about Aux, because anybody who's tried recording guitar at home or in a studio will have had this feeling of you play, and the sensation you have when you're in a rehearsal room with your amp and you turn it up and you're rocking out, and it's just this awesome feeling. And then you hear what it sounds like when you have, a studio engineer close mic the cabinet, and you hear that through studio monitors, and it's just like this, it's right in your face, and you don't feel comfortable playing at all.
Right.
That's really a lot of that is the room missing. And in Aux, we can actually simulate that room part of it to make it sound and feel way more like a real like live situation. Right. And it's actually controllable right here on the front, on the room knob here. So without going too much into detail about how we do all this stuff, one of the things that I should mention is that there's quite a few products out there that do like speaker and cab simulation. What we do is a little bit different. In the sense that a lot of these are something called IRs, which is essentially snapshots of sound. And we do it different in the sense that we actually model the speaker. Basically model paper, like literally paper and magnets and everything.
Right.
And what that means is that we're able to basically simulate or emulate exactly what happens to the speaker. Also over time, all these little things, whereas an IR is more of a snapshot in time. So it's like, going to, taking a picture of El Capitan in like perfect weather, and that's a representation of how it looks exactly at that point. But if the weather changes or if something else changes, you basically have to take a new picture. So we can actually simulate that inside the model. And the other thing is that because we have multiple microphones running, too close again, one room mic, we also simulate the way that these microphones actually react in the room together at the same time, because that's typically how you mic them up. You don't mic one, then you might put the other mic there. Also things like, if you crank a speaker up really hard, you'll get stuff like cone cry and speaker breakup, things like that we also simulate in our model. So all in all, it makes for a really, really realistic experience.
Right.
The last thing, and then we'll get to the new stuff, I guess. Sorry, I could be rambling about this. But the last thing is that because UA comes from a very strong recording background, so we have plugins that simulate rooms that obviously we're using the same technology in Aux. We have virtual microphones already that we also use in Aux. All this stuff kind of come together in Aux to bring you what we kind of see as like a complete studio-produced guitar sound.
Right.
So, you can certainly use the Aux to get something that would sound a little bit like what you'd get if you just cranked a Marshall in your rehearsal space and, heard how that sounds. But the real beauty of it, I think, lies in this produced sound. So Aux comes with a bunch of rigs designed by, all these producers we work with that just have, great ears for producing guitar tracks. So you can basically just scroll through these different rigs, as we call them, which are presets that, is enough to suit any sort of recording needs you might have for a particular track.
Right.
So to sum it up, it's just a really easy and fun way to record guitar, especially for guys who don't have the expertise, the equipment, and the place to really record guitars.
Sure. And also, of course, a great solution for a stage as well. If you're doing a silent stage in a worship situation, if you're someplace where you can't crank the 100-watt Marshall up and you need to control that volume, just as an attenuator, it's great. But you could feed direct out of this into your mixing console.
Totally, and we have guys doing that, big touring acts doing that to get like, you know, a great in-ear sound, or even go straight out to the front of house and basically let that be there.
Right.
Because that's the other part of it. It's way more consistent. You know, if you record a guitar or you want to, you know, mic up a guitar cabinet for front of house, even tiny little changes to where the microphone sits will yield pretty dramatic results. With aux, it's going to be the same predictable, you know, tone every single night.
Right, absolutely.
So that's, in short, that's aux.
Right.
There's way more in there, but that's the basic part of it.
Right. That's a great overview. Thank you. So, with all that said, version 1.2.
Yeah.
Some big changes here.
There are some pretty cool new changes, and there's one that I'm particularly happy about because as somebody who's dabbling quite a bit in like the harder genres of music, metal and hard rock stuff, there was one cabinet that I thought that we were sort of missing in the original lineup of cabinets and speakers that we offered to the customers, and that was some vintage 30 based cabinets. I mean, the vintage 30 in general is a really popular speaker, perhaps the most popular in the world, and I would say for anybody playing, you know, hard rock or metal stuff, it's almost like you need that sound in your arsenal of potential tones.
Right.
So in version 1.2 of the aux firmware and the accompanying app, we're basically giving away 5 new cabinets, 2 of which are vintage 30 based cabinets. So a more of a traditional Marshall style cabinet, and one that's a little bigger. Also with vintage 30s with leather clad, I'm sure people know which one I'm talking about. So something that has a little bit more girth to it, so all the gent guys and the math metal guys and, you know, all the downtuned guys can get like that full-bodied sound that they crave.
Right.
So that's 2 of those sounds, so 2 new cabinets, both 4x12, of course. The last one is also a 4x12, but it's a 30-watt greenback, which is cool for all sorts of more classic, all the way up to actually hard rock stuff. So if you think like AC/DC and Kansas and even some Guns N' Roses stuff is, you know, recorded doing 30-watt greenbacks, some Van Halen stuff as well. So,
sure.
So it's just another one of those cool classic caps that's so much fun to do. And, you know, we'll go through them in a little bit so people can hear how they sound. But one thing I want to say sort of in advance is the fact that the cool thing about speakers and cabinets in general is that it's sort of like an underrated part of the entire guitar tone. It's actually a big part of how your entire rig and your tone is, you know, sounds is the speaker.
Right.
And typically, you know, we're guitar players, so we'll have a bunch of different guitars, and maybe we even have a few different amps. But speakers is often something that we don't swap out a lot. Both because, you know, you have a 4x12 cabinet. Why would you buy another one?
Right.
But also if you had like a combo amp, for example, it's not like you just go out every day and buy a new speaker for your combo and then get the soldering iron out.
Right.
So with aux, you can actually fool around with all these different cabinets and all these different speakers and get all these really different cool tones without having to, you know, do all that stuff. You can literally just do it virtually instead. Right. And it can really bring an amp to life in the sense that, you know, there's definitely some combinations that would be kind of weird. But, you know, for your Marshall style sounds, you know, trying out all these different 4x12 caps, whether it's like some of the 25-watt greenbacks that we have in there already, or the new 30-watt greenback, or the vintage 30s, you know, will yield some radically different results without changing a single thing on the amp.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that's one of the really fun things about that, is just trying to compare and see how does the speaker actually, you know, how does that change my tone without doing anything else.
Right. Great ground for experimenting with different tones of things.
So those were the 3 4x12 caps. Then there's 2 new caps for the guys who are not as much into the harder rock stuff.
Right.
And that is a 2x12 with JBL 120Fs. So anybody who don't know what that is, it's a classic speaker from the 60s that's designed, it's super heavy, and it's designed to be virtually impossible to have it break up. It's a very pristine, almost hi-fi sounding speaker that will project really loudly. And anybody who knows that speaker will also know that it's like a favorite for country guys, jam band guys. So, Jerry Garcia is famous for using for a long time a Fender Twin with JBL 120Fs in it.
Right.
Pedal steel, lap steel guys will use that speaker as well. And even though it's not exactly that speaker he used, Steve Ray Vaughan also used that type of speaker. He used 15s and 10s. We have a 12 in there, or two 12s, but it's the same sort of feeling that you get. And then the last one is a 1x12 cabinet with also a JBL, but it's a JBL G125, which is sort of a little bit more of an esoteric speaker that was used quite heavily among the early boutique builders of the 70s and 80s.
Right.
A famous amp, really expensive, starting with D.
Right.
Would be an example of some amps that use that speaker. And it has a little bit of that JBL pristine hi-fi sound to it, but it's a little bit more restrained on the high-end frequencies. It's actually a really nice and sweet sounding speaker that's unlike pretty much anything else out there. So a cool little handful of new cabinets.
Right, right. Should we check them out?
Yeah, let's do it. So just for the sake of, everybody out there kind of figuring out what is this whole setup.
Right.
So basically, to kind of go through all the different sounds that's in there, we have two different amps sitting behind here, backstage. We have a Buckner Helios, and the Buckner is basically our guy for doing both more classic plexi, JMP style Marshall tones, but also like hot rodded gained up, JMC 800s and even hot rodded JMC 800s. So with this one we can get from like Hendrix over Van Halen and AC/DC all the way up to, pretty metal-y stuff.
Sure.
It's not going to do rectifier or 5150, but that'll be another video, I guess.
Right.
But you'll get the idea of at least how it's going to sound and react. So we'll use the Buckner for all those sounds, and we have one aux set up just for that.
Yep.
And then we have a Fender Deluxe Reverb, 64 reissue, to kind of simulate more of our clean platform, or not simulate, to be our clean platform.
Right.
And that's going into a separate aux.
Right.
Obviously, if we wanted to, we could just run everything off one aux, but then we'd have to swap cables, and you guys would be like, get on with it.
Right. So then we're coming out of the auxes, and we're bringing the signal into an Apollo X4, and then straight into our camera recorder.
Exactly, yeah.
So what you're hearing is basically direct through.
Yeah.
There's no speaker cabinets here, nothing's mic'd up, it's all just the aux.
Yeah, totally, and no pedal. So on some of these sounds you'll actually hear a few effects, and that's because, and I forgot to mention that, apart from the two main things that I talked about before, the attenuation and we call it CMR, cap mic room, part of aux, there's actually also a post-effect section, which is comprised of an EQ section, a 1176 compressor, a delay, and a reverb that you can add to any of the sounds you have. So basically, it's a way to kind of go, except for like specialty effects as, wahs and phasers and stuff like that.
Sure.
You could totally just take an aux, go into any recording situation and just get a perfectly finished track with compression, EQ, delay, and reverb without having to bring anything else. And that's what we're doing today.
Awesome.
All right, so it's kind of figured we'd start out with the Marshalls, and we'll go from like the more clean, I don't want to say pretty, but like cleaner stuff, and then we'll gradually get more heavy.
Okay.
So this is the new 4x12 cap with the 30-watt greenbacks in it.
Okay.
So one of the presets that we have in here is called Red Hot Smashed Chilies. So I guess people can kind of figure out what that's going on.
Clues there, yeah.
Yeah, and John Frusciante famously played a Silver Jubilee amp, along with some other ones, which is basically like a JMP/JCM 800 style Marshall,
right,
with a Vintage 30. No, sorry, not Vintage 30, with 30 watt greenbacks
Sure.
Celestians.
Sure.
So you'd get something like this.
Nice.
So that's how that sounds. Actually, on this preset, there is there's compression added because, you know, Frusciante used to play with quite a bit of compression sometimes, but obviously we can turn that off, which brings us to the other new thing that we'll talk a little bit about later, but just so people don't wonder what's happening when I'm doing stuff here. So the other thing that we added is foot switch control of these post effects that I talked about before. So I can basically use this little, in this case a Digitech, but you can use pretty much any sort of both active and passive foot switch for this, 1 or 3 foot switches, to turn on and off the effects that are on the preset. So in this case, I'll just turn off the compressor and you'll hear the difference.
Nice.
So that's the first sound.
Right.
So basically, aux is running totally standalone up here, and you can control quite a few things up here, but we deliberately tried to make it fairly simple. So the main knobs that you're controlling, over here you have like a little volume section for line outs, for headphones, and the attenuation. And over here you can control the room mics separately. So if you want to bring in a little bit more of the room, you can do that if you want to take it out. But the rest of all the stuff, and there's a ton of stuff happening in here, is controlled basically by one knob called the rig knob, which is essentially a preset. Everything else that you want to edit is over here on my screen over here. So aux comes with a free PC, Mac, and iPad app. And we're running the new version here. So whenever I switch here, so now we're going from the 30 watt to a vintage 30 cap. And we'll switch to this channel here. Let's see. So now we're going into like more Guns N' Roses territory, which I can't play any Guns N' Roses at all, but I'll... So that's how that sounds. And now we get into more of that rock thing that the vintage 30s really do well.
Right.
So then we can switch to the next one, which is more of a processed sound. So this is trying to kind of get into more of these like 80s Vi and Satriani style sounds with quite a bit more gain. So it's more of a hot rodded Marshall style tone. So we'll just switch from input, the plexi input, to the hot rodded input here. See what's...
Sounds great.
So just like a classic 80s kind of tone. And one of the things you'll notice here is that there's quite a bit of room mic on this. There's reverb on first of all, so we can turn that off. But you can still hear that kind of roominess. So over here on the app and the settings here actually override what you see over here. Right now it looks like the room is turned all the way down.
Right.
It really isn't. But if I do this, now it is. So you'll hear the difference. And we can bring it back up again.
Really brings it back to life.
Yeah, it really brings it back to life, and obviously you can use it. A lot of times you want to use that as sort of the fine spot where it just sounds natural, but you can definitely also use it more as an effect, which is a little bit of what we're doing here.
Right.
So then we can move up to, let's see here, we can move up to the next one, which is this guy here. So this is more of a solo preset. So in this case we have some plate reverb and we have some delay going on.
Nice.
So you have that.
Right.
And then the last two ones we have are more going into more of the metal, or that's just some of the rigs. There's plenty more in there. But the rig knob here has 6 settings, so I just basically picked 6 different ones and put in there. So this has more of a early Metallica style of sound to it, and we actually added some really fast slapback delay to kind of simulate the sound Metallica had at especially in their early recordings where they doubled a lot of their things and added a little bit of delay to it. So you'll hear. But we can turn that off if, that's very much an effect, but you'll still get that. So you get that super tight sound. And the funny thing is, again, with the exception of the first 2 examples that I played before, the amp is in exactly the same setting.
Right.
So we haven't changed a thing. It's literally just the speaker and the microphones and the EQing inside aux that makes all the difference to the sound.
That's amazing.
And obviously, if we wanted to get way more metal, we could totally bring in something with more gain and maybe like a 7-string guitar, and we could go, crazy on Meshuggah stuff or something like that. But that's for another time. But the last one I chose is something that sounds like a little bit later era Metallica, kind of Black Album style sounds. Which you can use for that stuff, but you can also use it for like more extreme metal stuff.
That's crazy. It's crazy that we're sitting here and really what we're hearing through the monitors is just a conversation level guitar, but it sounds like a Marshall that is just
cranked all the way up.
Yeah, cranked all the way up. It really is brilliant.
And it literally is this thing where, it sounds like a finished production to me. You can also always tweak a few things here and there, but this is literally something, you take your amp, whatever your favorite amp is, and regardless of what your genre is and everything, you find either a rig or you create your own by, picking the speaker you like, picking the microphones you like, tweaking the EQs.
Right.
And that's literally that's a substitute for, going into a studio and, finding a great engineer with a great room and a cool selection of mics that, you can just do that at home.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fun because suddenly, you become the producer and you can get some really quality results super fast and super easy.
Right. Brilliant. Should we switch over to the Fender?
Yeah, let's do that.
Some of the clean
Let's
examples?
do that. So the first one of the new cabs that we have for the more clean sounds.
Right.
In this case, the Fender, is the 2x12 with JBLs in it, and it sounds like this. So it has this really nice, sparkly kind of sound to it, and even if you hit it hard, it's kind of, it still retains a lot of clarity. Obviously, that's the one that's like really favored by country musicians and these jam bands. And just for fun, what I did as well is that I took the one of the older cabinets as well, which is our original 2x12 with Jensens in it. Mm-hmm. So that's what you'll typically find in a Fender Twin before somebody started modding them and putting other speakers inside, just so people can hear the difference. So this is the JBL. And again, totally the same sound, just switching the speaker. And I mean, again, both are great sounds. It's not like you can, favor one over the other. It's just different applications. And again, you could literally like fill out an entire, tons of different tracks of guitar and just switching, cabinet and speakers and kind of have it fit in different places. So the third one is a variation of that, but most of these rigs are done by one of our employees called James Santiago, and he's like a encyclopedia of guitar knowledge.
That's right.
And he did a really cool one, I think, that's sort of, and I'm not going to pretend to be able to play this stuff, but it's sort of like an Eric Johnson clean sound style of thing. Again, Eric famously uses these big twins in stereo.
And nothing has changed on the amp. Nothing has
changed
on the guitar.
There. It's literally the same thing. Yeah.
Wow.
So then we can switch to the next one, and now we get into the 1x12s. Mm-hmm. So this is the 125G, also a JBL speaker.
Okay.
And as I said before, if we kind of go back to the starting point here. And then switch over to this guy here.
Big difference.
There's a big difference, but it still has a little bit of that glassiness. And I think if you go from like, the 2x12 JBLs, and then over here to the 1x12, the other JBL, which is a little warmer. You can hear there's a certain kinship between them, but it just kind of rolls off in a really nice way.
Right.
And then of course we can compare that to the 2x12 with the Jensens.
Right.
So again, a totally different kind of sound. Oh, and I also took this one in. So this is actually it's this one. There we go. That's right. So I also took the original 1x12. So that's typically what you'll find in the Deluxe, which is literally the amp we have behind here.
Right.
So 1x12 Jensen style speaker. And and then we can switch back to the JBL 1x12. And then the last one I put in here is a rig called Little Squashed Feet, and Lowell George,
sure,
the slide player, the amazing player from Little Feet, famously used one of these D amps with that particular speaker in it. So we tried to do something that has a little bit of that flavor. We can turn up the volume of the amp. I hope I don't kill everything over here. So this is basically, again, that 125, G125, with some compression and some plate reverb added to it. So, and this is literally just scratching the surface of what it can do. On top of the rigs that we designed in-house, and James designed most of those, we also had, at GearFest, we had Kenny Greenberg come out and do a little seminar on aux, and he graciously, I shouldn't say lent, because he actually gave us some of his favorite rigs. Both some of the 3 in total, 2 of which he's using in the studio, and the third one that he's using with his Vox style amp live with Kenny Chesney. So that's literally the sound that he's using live. As you talked about, aux is also a great live solution.
Right.
That's what he's using live on tour.
Right.
So there's quite a few goodies of different things in there. On top of the new cabinet, there's also a ton of new rigs to kind of try out some different sounds, and obviously use as a starting point to create, your own favorite sounds.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's the new caps. Mm-hmm. So 5 in total. The other part that I mentioned before is the foot switch control, and I've been kind of doing it as we played along, because some of these, as soon as you start adding some of the effects, it sounds great, but it can also be a little bit difficult to hear what's actually the difference between the speaker part of it.
Sure.
So to assign the foot switches, we can go over here, and it's pretty simple. So it's almost like a step-by-step guide, and you can almost use any type of foot switch with this. You can use a passive one, which is what we have here, which basically means that it doesn't require any power.
Right.
Or you can use more of an amp style power supply, which is typically also passive. But some of them have LEDs, and aux will actually power. I noticed I didn't even realize I plugged in an amp. And it's like, oh, it's lighting up.
Well, I found it up by accident.
Yeah. So you can do that, or you can use a powered one with LEDs on there, and you can choose to use either a 1, 2, or 3 foot switch, 3-button foot switch, depending on how much control you want. If you just have a little bit of pedalboard real estate left and you just want to have 1 foot switch to do something, you can do that, or you can have up to 3, is what I have here.
Nice.
So basically, over on the app here, you choose between 1, 2, and 3 foot switch buttons. When you use the 3 one, you don't have to worry about the other foot switch options. If we go back to one of the other ones, you'll be able to choose whether your foot switch is a latching or a momentary style. So it's basically 2 different ways of constructing a foot switch.
Right.
And the best way to explain it is, if you're unsure which one the one you have is, or the one you buy from Sweetwater, which one you get, it's just a matter of trial and error. There's literally 2 buttons to press. So if your foot switch doesn't work, press the button, especially the latching momentary button, and see if it helps.
Sure.
Then we have the inverse button, and that is basically, foot switches are pretty dumb in the sense that they don't know whether they're on or off. So if you have a foot switch with an LED, it's nice that when your delay is on the aux, that the LED is also on the foot switch.
Right.
So the inverse basically flips it over, so that if there's a discrepancy, I can't say that in English, sorry. I tried to the best of my ability.
It was just fine.
So if there is a mix-up between on and off on the foot switch and the actual app or the aux, you can flip it around so that it matches.
So the lights on or off.
Yeah.
Right. Brilliant.
So the last thing of these more nerdy things is that, as I said before, foot switches can be pretty dumb with that stuff. You can actually also be in a situation where if you press foot switch 1, inside the aux, it's foot switch 2 that turns on and off. So the little buttons down here that say swap basically allow you to swap the order of the switches. So again, so it matches up, so you don't, in a live situation, have to go like, oh, I got to turn on my delay and it's foot switch 1, but I have to press 2 to make it work.
Right,
so you can swap those around. So you can basically customize it so it works again with pretty much any conceivable foot switch out there.
Who knew there was so much with foot switches?
Yeah. It's typically foot switches are pretty simple. It's just that everybody who designs them decides to do it in different ways.
Right.
So the last thing, and by far the most fun thing, is actually assigning the effects. And what you can do is that depending on, not even depending on how many foot switch buttons you have, but basically each button has a corresponding effects area here, and I can click and assign any of the effects to a button. So in this case, if we go here to the rig, now I assigned all the effects to one button.
Okay.
So if we go over here on the rig page, you'll notice something interesting, because by default in the rig, reverb and compressor is on.
Right.
Now I basically toggle the state of all 4 effects, so that means that it turns reverb off and delay, reverb off and compressor off, but it turns delay on and EQ on. So you can use it to creatively to swap between things. So if I wanted to, for example, have a foot switch that swapped between delay and reverb, I could just basically have reverb on in the rig preset and delay off and assign a foot switch to both, and it'll toggle between them. Brilliant. Obviously, another common thing would be to just do it like, turn both on by default, and when I press now, you'll see that everything comes on and off. So in this case, you could do something like, have delay and reverb on, off on one button. Or something really neat, which I've used live and had a lot of fun with in a band I play in, where I literally only use 2 sounds, which is a rhythm sound and a lead sound. So I'll just have like bone dry lead sound with nothing on, and then have a 1 foot switch pedal, and I'll just assign that to compression, delay and reverb. I won't use compression for compressor, but if you turn the threshold to 0, so it's actually not compressing, you can use it to boost the signal.
Right.
So it becomes a solo boost, just like 340 dB higher, and then with delay and reverb added. So literally no pedal board, just 1 foot switch for that, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So if we go back here, the last thing is that to make it, even with what you can do here, you can have a lot of different options on how you assign that. You can do it something really simple, which is what I did before, which was basically just say that foot switch 1 controls delay, foot switch 2 controls reverb, and foot switch 3 control the compressor. If we go over here on the rig side, you'll see delay, reverb, compressor. But obviously you can do all sorts of other things. The only thing we did to kind of make sure that it didn't get too confusing for people is that you can only assign an effect once. So if I decide to assign delay over here, then it's automatically disabled over here, because otherwise you can get into some really weird situations where you think you're turning something off, but you're really turning it on, and vice versa.
Sure.
So again, with this, obviously it's really neat if you just, if you sit at home and you just want to, have a quick way to turn some effects on or off. For example, if you play something and for your solo stuff, it's nice to have some delay on, and now you switch to rhythm, you want to turn it off. But especially in a live situation as well, it's very nice to be able to do this on the fly instead of having to open up the app, where that's literally been the only way you could do it beforehand.
Right. So the other beautiful thing about this is, once you've saved all of this into the app, you can save it to the 6 locations on the front panel. So when you go out live, you don't have to have the app.
Yeah, totally.
To play live, or even in the studio, you can just have your favorite 6 rigs stored there, and you don't have to have the computer or the iPad. Or
yeah, that's a super important point. Obviously, it'd be weird if you were playing in front of an audience with this thing sitting next to it. So yeah, the whole idea is that you go into the rig setting here. The assign setting, and then you go, let's see here, there we go, to the rig slots. And then you can basically just click for each of these 6 positions on the rig button here, or the rig selector. You can just choose your 6 favorite presets and just switch between those.
Right.
So no need to, as you said, be all nerdy and bring out the iPad mid-set.
Right. Brilliant.
So that's essentially the new software. And I think I mentioned that before, but it's completely free. The firmware for anybody who already updated their aux before, it'll come over the air. So basically all they have to do is go into their settings and press check if there's a firmware update. aux will do the rest. If they haven't updated and have one of the earlier ones, they'd have to download an installer from the UA website that basically creates a little bootable USB disk or USB what do you
thumb
call
drive.
it? Yeah, thumb drive, and then basically update aux that way. And then, of course, they can download the PC or Mac app on the UA website and the iPad app in the App Store.
Right. However you want to do it.
Yeah,
right.
Tons of options.
But it's easy, whichever way you do it. And I think I mentioned to you that I have one myself.
Yeah.
And what I love about it is that it is so simple. Whether you're using the app, whether you're working from the front panel, whether you're on stage in the studio, and it really is plug and play, simple. And for a guitar player who's used to just cranking a knob and turning to select different things, you can do all that right here. It's really
and that's to me as well. I'm a big fan of things that are easy and simple to use, and the front panel of this pretty much couldn't be any simpler.
Right.
And of course, for all the tweakers out there, there's plenty of stuff in there to nerd out on if you have those needs and interest as well.
Sure. Dora, thanks so much for giving us a tour of the new software and also of just the aux in general and all the different tones and things in there. So much fun stuff going on here.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure to come.
Always great to see you.
Thank you.
Come back soon.
I will.
All right. And thank you for joining us here for Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. Be sure to tune in next time. We'll have more guitars, we'll have more amps, more effects. We'll be making lots of music. I'm Mitch Gallagher.